The great tales of old are passed down through the ages from one generation to another, and whispered by children at night. Many a time such tales are not to be taken quite literally, and there is no reminder of their reality outside of the shapes in the dark that imaginations make into insidious monsters of the foulest kind. But there are some stories told among folk that arise out of trivial places, odd things out of which to build a myth. No one would consider such things, for the legends of old are born of mountains and deep chasms, from wounds in the skin of the world, and from tall dark spires looming in the distance like great black fingers pointing in futility toward an apathetic sky. Instead, these other tales are born from things seen by all. Perhaps it is an old knife kept by the family that holds significance. Perhaps a woman wears a ring that sat on the finger of a secret legend none dare speak aloud, but all remember it when she is near. Or perhaps, as in this instance, a well on the outskirts of a simple farmer's tract holds the sweet, cool pulse of history, and fear ever gnaws at the spirit as it passes along the road nearby when travelers look up and see the old stones at the top of the hill. That is the case with the Well of Mirefield. As one of the two closest towns to Belhaven, one might guess Mirefield to be more civilized than those distant settlements past the unscaled summit to the west. It was one of the first towns founded after the initiation of the Prime Expanse, and has withstood more than its fair share of tribulations and trials. Its founder, Amadeus Boulderbrand, dug the town out of the fertile plains by the sweat of his brow, and established its foundations in the swamp with his own two hands. Over the centuries, agriculture blossomed, and the swamp was drained through means of both dredging and drought. A time came shortly before the founding of Grimsby and the first passing of Fideb Forest, when Mirefield was in sore need of water. Its crops and its people languished, and it looked as if a dusty famine would soon be upon them. Therefore, each man dug his own well upon his land, in hopes that at least some of them might strike an underground spring, and thereby provide water for all. To the amazement of many, the plan was not only a success, but a resounding one at that. Over half of the men in the town found water, and each shared as much as was needed with his neighbor. Trenches were dug, and soon a network of aqueducts was established. With some minor assistance from engineers from nearby Belhaven, Mirefield became the second region in the Prime Expanse to fulfill the dream of running water in every home and public establishment. But on the outskirts of Mirefield lay the farmland of Fernthorn, who had dug 7 wells before finding the nectar of life he sought. By the time he had failed in his 7th attempt, he retired to a nearby hilltop, the highest point on his land, from which he could look down upon the main road that bridged the physical and cultural gap between his town and the extravagant capital city. To this day, no one knows what compelled him to dig in the most unlikely of places. However, when one hears the recounting of the tale, suspicions grow like weeds, naturally, and in plentiful number. Fernthorn's well began as a geyser, spilling over and threatening to flood his farmland. However, the initial burst was only that, and soon the liquid life bubbled and flowed smoothly. Fernthorn, his wife, and his 5 children filled their barrels right away and drank from the clear, cold stream, energized like never before after so long without. So happy were they to have their own supply of water that they worked from sundown to sunup, digging trenches, filling a pond for their ducks, and supplying full troughs for their animals, who all drank just as greedily as their masters. For the water from this well carried a sweetness not found anywhere else. The next day, those from the inner town spoke of how Fernthorn rode like a wild man, proclaiming the great news and begging to be connected to the aqueduct. In his face was a wild look, one of ecstasy like never before. It was pure life, the water that flowed from his well. Undefiled, the very idea of water itself, pouring from the loins of Zarathus for her children to drink. He stayed only long enough to sign the necessary documents, then raced back to his farm, desperate for more of the life-giving sustenance. As he left, he told the others he needed neither food nor rest. The water was enough. Some were mildly disturbed, but many were intrigued and came to visit. The children played in the pond. The women took water for cooking. The men drank it like it was the best mead they'd ever tasted. Soon more of the water's eccentric properties were discovered. Those with fever were healed by just a few sips. Workers stayed awake and vital even during the dark hours of the night. It is even said that a man who had been born blind and crippled was given his sight and the use of his legs after drinking enough of the water from Fernthorn's well. The prudent ones in town noticed the great happenings, but also the excess. Some farms had been deserted, their inhabitants moving to camp on the lawn of the Fernthorn residence so that they might be near the well. Crops were once more languishing, for the mystical properties of the great well did not seem to extend to the ground under which it flowed. Corn withered when watered from the well, beans failed to form, tomatoes grew within a day and rotted immediately. Not only that, but the animals that had drunk so greedily of the water were just as quick to shun it. Fernthorn's dogs would not go near it, and just the smell of the sweetness caused them to stumble to a hiding place where they would vomit. Yet these warning signs went unheeded. The water was too sweet, and few in the town had the power to resist its call. Within a fortnight, those who drank deepest claimed to hear one another's inner voices. Thoughts would be passed around from one to another, though no man, woman, or child could be found who had been the original thinker. It was a few days after this that disaster struck. The engineer from Belhaven was riding into town early one morning, passing the Fernthorn farm, the very place he'd heard so much about, when his donkey was sent into a panic by a loud shriek. It came from the farm, and soon it was joined by others. The engineer recounted that the sound was unlike any he had ever heard, a noise of sorrow proceeding from the souls of ones condemned to hell. And hell it was for them, for the well had suddenly, inexplicably, run dry. Fernthorn and others climbed down with shovels and dug frantically. Within minutes, the water bubbled forth again, and the celebration was just as ravenous as the despair had been tormenting. The engineer, seeing all of this, prepared himself to receive some of the water, but then beheld the excesses in which Fernthorn and his beneficiaries partook, acts of both savagery and lewdness, the likes of which he had never imagined. Indeed, so excessive was the celebration that the engineer himself had to step in and call the masses to their senses before one of them willingly offered herself up as a human sacrifice. The engineer quickly reported to the authorities in Mirefield, few of whom were left who had not tasted the water. Those who had resisted drinking in the beginning did not doubt him at all, but some who had drunk the first fruits of the nectar had felt a twinge of despair earlier that day at the drying up of the well, though they had not known from where their melancholy originated. They were glad to hear that the well had been restored, and they contemplated going to have another drink, for they had not been in several days. A quarrel arose among the town officials, and the engineer withdrew, refusing to contribute his expertise to the Mirefield Aqueduct project in any way. His own advice was that the well be blocked up and forgotten. Needless to say, his counsel fell on deaf ears. Despair struck again when the well ran dry the next day. This time it took the masses working many hours, digging deeper and deeper before the water returned, and this time it was not the flowing, frothing swell that had gushed forth, but only a small stream that slowly rose. The drinkers consumed it as fast as it emerged, and violence broke out quickly as none could get their fill. It was during this scuffle that several of the men went mad with greed and blamed Fair and Fernthorn for being selfish and not turning the well over to the town. In a savage act, Fernthorn, his wife, and his 5 children were sacrificed to the well, their throats slit and bodies gutted and burned to the sound of wild cheers and hysterical sobbing. At this, witnesses report that the water of the well no longer carried its refreshing, sweet, rejuvenating taste. Now it was bitter, sour, and lukewarm when it trickled up from the well, which had to be dug deeper and deeper, soon by the hour. In the end, the townsfolk who had consumed the water continued to dig, continued to drink, and continued to battle one another for any drop they could get, until the well itself was filled not with the coveted natural liquor, but with corpses and blood, filled all the way to the top. And still, the crazed mob drank. The prudent stayed away, listening to the savage screams of both horror and joy that came from the Fernthorn hill. Even when all noise ceased, it was many days before they ventured back to see what had become of the farm. To the last, the well had not spared a soul. When the officials arrived, weapons ready, the last man lay beside the stones of the well, clawing at them with the stumps of his fingers and licking it with the shreds of his tongue. He was put out of his misery then and there. Everything and everyone on the farm was dead. The animals had died of thirst long ago, refusing to drink. The pond had dried up. the bodies of the fish and ducks long since devoured by the greedy. The vultures did not gather around the carrion. So vile were the things that had taken place on account of the well that not even the ravages of natural decay had begun in the flesh of the deceased, as if nature itself refused to accept the minerals and matter back into its fold. In the end, the bodies were burned. The blood was washed away by water from other wells. The well was blocked up, and prayers were said over all. Descendants of the officials present say that their grandsires all swear to this one thing, that when blocked up with stones, dirt, and a wooden covering, a loud, anguished groan was let loose from the mouth of the thing, a sound of angry pleading. The consensus of the town was not that the farm had been cleansed or reconsecrated in any way, only that the evil of the well would no longer infest the place as it once had. The property could not be sold to another, for no one would buy it. After several years, it was decided by the officials of Mirefield that there would no longer be any offers sent, nor would any offers for the property be accepted. The Fernthorn farm was eventually rebuilt and inhabited, with one exception. The property title and zoning excluded the hill on which sat the damnable well. Finally, Mirefield had put Fernthorn's abomination behind them, and all was right with the town again. To this day, all is well, except for one thing. When winter passes over the land, and the silence after the snow has fallen and gathered around the hill, the wind grows still, and no beast of the field or bird of the air will come near to the well. The residents of the farm will vow upon pain of torture and death that if you approach the well during these moments, you will still hear a faint dripping beneath the ground, and your tongue will swell with an unnatural thirst. Most say that such thirst can be quenched by returning home and drinking the water found there. For others, the only thing preventing the well from being reopened is their superstition. For who knows which water can truly satisfy? Thanks for listening to one of my horror fantasy folktales, dark little legends from the world of my next novel, The Decay. These stories come from the land of Zarathis, a place of old magic, buried terrors, broken truths, and places where reality has worn thin enough for nightmares to press their fingers through. Some tales are warnings, some are fragments of history, and some are lies that have survived long enough to grow teeth of their own. As The Decay draws closer, these folk tales offer glimpses into the world behind the novel, fears, myths, and the shadows its people have learned not to name. Once again, thanks for listening, and tread carefully. In Zarathis, very few voices can be trusted.